His presentation should be about future of XML. Nice head. Oh, great.
I'm sure it's what everyone wears here.
Definitely. I just forget mine at home. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me in the back? Can you still hear me if I take my hat off?
Just a little.
Maybe afterwards. All right. Well, this morning we had a fabulous talk looking backwards a little bit, and now we'll end of the morning, we look forwards. This is, as I learned from Dana this morning, this is XML : future. Or future : XML, or something. So I'm here actually to listen, primarily. So I decided instead of doing a formal talk with slides, and I've done several talks like the one I'm about to, or several sessions at different conferences. I've kind of figured out what works and what doesn't. The danger is I do slides and I witter on for half an hour, and then we have 10 minutes for questions, and I don't hear very much. And what I want to do is give people an understanding a bit about W3C and how you can get involved and how you can change the future. Right, because the future is mutable until it becomes the present. Alright, so we can change it. This is not part of the talk. This thing I'm projecting up here is actually, well, it's an image, open source image editor, but the image displayed is a draft. It's not final yet. We were hoping to have it final and announce it officially at this conference with a logo for XML and also some buttons that people can put on their web pages and stuff. And I'll come back to why we need buttons. Whether we need buttons to look like this or some other design, I don't know. That's another. People after you're welcome to find me at lunch or this afternoon and give me feedback about this, but as it's not final. All right. Future. Thank you, Dana, for giving me my new title. All right. Please feel free to to raise a hand and jump in and interrupt at any point. I will be more assertive about trying to persuade people to do that as time goes on. Before we talk about the future, time past and time present, eternally present, said T.S. Eliot. So a very quick overview of where we are today. If you ask Yuri Rabinsky at Software, who I always used to work for, always used to describe SGML and markup as being like a group of blind people looking at examining an elephant in a room, and they walk up to it and feel it, and one person says, well, it's a giant pillar, and another one says, well, it's at the other end, and he says, well, it's bendy, it's very bendy, elephants are bendy, and another one's in the middle and says, I can't reach it, I don't know what it is. Alright, so as I go to different communities, I asked one community, I asked in Japan at a conference, what should we do with XML? And at the same session, someone said, well, the 98% use case of XML is transmitting RDF. So anything not used by RDF, just get rid of it. And that would be great. But then someone got up and said, well, the 98% use case of XML is web services. So anything not needed by web services, just get rid of it. We don't need all that stuff that RDF uses. And these two were perfectly serious and both talking at the same time. Alright, so today, does anyone in the room have a television? It's a device that projects moving pictures into your home. Does anyone have one? No. Well, yeah, someone's got to have one. Alright. Has anyone bought one in the last 5 years? Yeah, anyone else? A couple of people. If you buy a television set today, it supports something called UPnP. Right? But what this means is when you turn on the television, click, you know, it takes a while to warm up and the picture gradually grows. It's sending out messages in XML to try and locate other devices like video recorders, DVD players, home theatre systems. Alright? Now, how long do televisions last? Let's say 30 years is a reasonable expected lifespan of a television. Right? People would get upset if we started broadcasting hexagonal pictures instead of rectangular ones and everyone had to throw their televisions away. You laugh. If we change XML so that those televisions don't work, people would be pretty irritated. The reality is the televisions would not in fact change. Right? So it's kind of frozen. So there's constraints in what we can do. W3C, we have the XML core working group, one of whose chairs is in this room, at least one of whose chairs, I don't think Paul is here, but Norm is, working on maintaining XML and doing essential fixes. We're recently updating the associating style sheet spec and the processing instruction, recently working on a new processing instruction for linking to schemas, for example. And then beyond that, we get to things you can do with XML and the related specs. So like the elephant, this is a particular way of looking at XML and specs that's not based on our organization internally. You create XML with, with editors, whether it's a text editor, whether it's Oxygen, whether it's, I understand there's others. Maybe you use APIs, maybe you use data binding so that you simply say, serialize my objects. And in that case, the fact that XML is basically irrelevant to you. What you're doing is saving your objects. If you're working on a transcription of a medieval manuscript, then you're probably very familiar with the XML at the extreme. We have to support both those use cases. When you've created it, maybe you want to send it to someone else. The primary purpose of XML is interchange. Because no one ever interchanged documents. No one could ever tell if anyone else was using XML. So it wouldn't matter. So we have MIME and HTTP and application XML, which was developed in conjunction with IETF, of course. Today we also have EXI for a more efficient way of transmitting XML. That's not a complete recommendation, but expected to be this year. So that's kind of near future code on XML. At the other end, you load your document with APIs like SACS that was developed on the community XML dev list that Peter Murray Rust started. You validate it, perhaps with relaxing or XSD, DTD. You can use SML, the service modeling language, to have a many-to-many relationship between schemas and documents. And this is very high level, I'm oversimplifying. There's a new version of schema called 1.1 that is a current draft on the W3C homepage, so you can find out what's coming. And the future is mutable, you can still send comments. When you've got your XML, you transform it, you change it into something else, you change it into different XML. People often look at me oddly and say, why do you want to do that? It's XML away. With XSLT and XQuery, you format it with CSS, with XSLFO, with many other systems. Right, so there's tons of stuff that people are, and there's tons of stuff I've not mentioned here. Both the W3C relating to XML, stuff like SVG, which I've now mentioned, but whole tons of stuff. So, if we're doing all this stuff, how do you get involved? First thing is look at the specs. About once a month, someone comes to me and says they're writing an XML parser. And I say, please don't do that. And they say, why? It's fun. Look, I can parse over brackets already. And I've invented all these new features. And I tell them about what I call the XML promise, which is that any XML application is licensed by the XML spec to read and process any XML document. That is why we get our network effect. That's why when you over here make an XML document, you over here can read it. To keep that promise, firstly, we have to be very careful when we change XML that we don't break existing documents. And secondly, when you write an XML parser, you've got to be careful that it doesn't just read the XML that your program understands. It doesn't just read the minimum set of XML, but it understands all of the syntax in the core XML spec for every well-formed document. Okay, going off and reading DTDs is optional, for example. And it doesn't have to do anything with stuff your program doesn't understand. Parser, at least read the spec and come up with questions like that. The answer was yes, it does matter which order the angle brackets go in, which is his question, but in fact the spec doesn't say. We thought it was obvious. We were wrong. For that constraint it wasn't obvious. I could see the confusion. Okay, so go read the specs. When you find something that isn't obvious, like this person, as I said to that person, please send a comment. See the status section in that spec. So you go here. Alright, you go to that URI, w3.org/tr. If you can't find anything else on the new W3C website, never mind, that's still there. You can go there. Alright? Read the spec. If you don't understand it, find a mailing list to ask about. People will help you. There's lots of mailing lists around for all these things. If after you've asked on a mailing list, you still find something that's not clear or that you don't understand or you think is wrong, send a comment. See the status section in the spec and send a comment. Even if you just have an idea, you say, why doesn't the spec do this? Again, ask on a mailing list, ask the community first. And quite often you'll get the response, yeah, that's a good idea, why doesn't it? Why doesn't XQuery have a time axis? Well, send it as a comment. Right? Get involved. Change the future. After you've sent quite a few comments, you might find, if you work at a company, for example, if you're sending comments on, I don't know, on XSLT2, and you work on a company that's implementing XSLT2 or is a heavy user, you might say it would be to our benefit to participate in the working group and join the working group. If you've sent a lot of comments, we might contact you and say, you know, why aren't you here? Why are you out there? Why aren't you in here? So it's a very open process. If you're an organisation whose primary business, I guess an example would be when we were doing efficient XML, an Australian company contacted me and said, holy cow, you know, this could save us millions of dollars every year. It's really interesting. Can we join the working group for free? And we said, well, we don't charge for the specs, but if you're in fact a billion-dollar company and your primary area of business is in fact in transmitting XML documents, then we think you ought to join W3C and be involved, because we think you should be heard. We want to hear. Right? We want you to have a voice on that spec. No, you can't join for free, partly because you ought to be paying, partly because if you don't pay, you won't value it, so we need you to value it. But if your company is not involved, like if you're an international greengrocers company and you think it would be really useful to be involved more closely in XML schema, right, then we have a mechanism by which you can join without paying, because it's unlikely you would ever pay to join that work, and yet you may have a lot of valuable contributions. We still want to hear from you, so you can join. Okay. center. Alright, so I want to talk a bit about where we can go in the future and working with different organizations, like Parallel Lines. So one question I have, who here is involved in a W3C working group? About 120, okay. Who here is involved in an ISO committee? About 70, okay. What about IETF? One, all right. What about Oasis? That's interesting, actually. 5. Smaller number. It's about half the number that was said yesterday for ISO, and about a third the number that said yes for W3C, I think. Anyone here involved in the XML consortium? Probably not. Yeah, I mean, 2 of us, maybe. It's a Japanese organisation, so we don't have many people here. All right. So there's a number of specs. There are some joint specs, but for the most part, these organisations develop specs on their own. Sometimes there's liaison. We need more liaison between these organisations. One thing that's unusual about W3C is that we have a full-time staff. I don't know, do you know that? We have a full-time staff of roughly 50 people at the moment. And there's a little over, I think it's about 350 member organisations right now. We lost about 100 because of a combination of people companies buying out other companies. There's just been a spree of that. And so we go from 2 members to 1 member. And companies at the end of the so-called .com bubble bursting took several years because people they were joining for a 3-year commitment, so it could take up to 3 years for them to vanish. Okay. Working together with other organisations, though, of course there's the ISO committee, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute when I talk about specs. There's the ISO committee that used to work on SGML stuff. The IETF is mostly about protocol and communications. Oasis also has some technical stuff. ISO and IETF don't have a large technical staff, but Oasis does have some stuff. And they tend to be more on business applications. W3C has always tried to do specs that would apply across all industries, not a single industry. We haven't always, sometimes recently we've taken on some specs that are industry specific as an experiment. So in the semantic web they did life sciences stuff, for example, but we've not done it in XML. One of the things about having a staff is that you notice if you've got 2 or 3 specs that are in the same area. Now, sometimes people hate us for it. So, for example, it's actually before I joined W3C, I might have done it anyway, when XSLT and XSLT2 and XQuery started to happen. Saying, well, you guys, why can't you're both based on XPath, by the looks of it, why can't you all be using XML schema and have, it all make it fit together, yeah? No, I'm oversimplifying. And I apologise for revising history a little bit, I know. There are other examples, but they're harder to explain. Robin can think of some. ISO, for example, doesn't have such a large technical staff. And when we started doing investigating more efficient ways of interchanging XML, Robin was chairing that work. He's laughing because I think we lost count of the number of people who said there's an ISO spec that gives a binary way of doing interchanging XML. Literally, I don't know how many there are. I know of 4, although I can't name them. But I'm willing to believe there's more. And of those 4, I think at least 2 did not cope with what one XQuery participant once called the So liaison is very important. On the other hand, the target audiences, the cultures of different standard organisations are very different, and people write specs for different kinds of people, and that's an issue too. And it's something we have to bear in mind. Okay, that was blank. All right, XML future / ideas, term equals short. Is that kind of how it would work, Dana? Yeah, okay. Future axis. All right, we have an abbreviation we've used, which is QT, is for loosely for query, XML query and XSLT and XPath. Because XXX is an abbreviation for something else. It's about to become a new top-level domain name. It wouldn't be a good choice. Turns out if you put XXX on your web pages, Google delists them. So one of the things I've heard recently, and I'm hearing a lot at this conference, is a need for more education and outreach. I've looked within the W3C, the two most effective outreach groups, I think, are internationalization and accessibility. And the organizational thing that has made, I'll be specific and say accessibility. I talked for some time to people who did the accessibility outreach work. And the organizational thing that made it effective is they made it a working group. And that's because there's a minimum time commitment. And organizations would join and they would send someone to work on training, tutorials. Why do we need outreach? Well, every month someone comes up to me and says, I'm looking for an XQuery programmer. And that's someone actively coming to me. I know that there's this huge demand. Does anyone here write XQuery? Yeah, a few, all right. So, as far as some recruiters are concerned, there's more people in this room that exist. In other words, if you go around and ask recruiters, they'll say XQuery. I think there's maybe a dozen people doing XQuery on the whole planet. All right. And when you ask people why are you not using XSLT2, or why are you not using XQuery, why are you not using XPath2, I hear implementations. Who here is using XSLT1 primarily?
Primarily?
As opposed to 2, yeah. Yeah. What about XPath1? Right. Would it make a difference if major web browsers switched to XSLT2? Yeah. No. But for some people, yes. And PHP, for example. Okay, I'm interested. You said no.
libxml XSLT switching to.
So what if there was a C API to XSLT2?
Yes.
Right, so it's quite easy to identify things that people say, why aren't you using XSLT2? Because there are environments in which Java is not acceptable for a number of reasons. And did I have one? I think in fact there may be one soon. I'm not sure of the status of that. But if there isn't, the company that's working on one called France is working on. Okay, but I hear other reasons. There's the fear. They say, because there's only 12 people who know XQuery on the whole planet, because the nearest inhabitable planet is quite a long way away, actually, we better not use it, because if we use it, we won't be able to, the management will say, when you've gone, we won't be able to maintain this. But it's a myth, right? And we need to change the myth. We need to get rid of the myth and show the reality that there's in fact more than 30 people using XQuery. Every day I get asked questions about XSLT from people, so I know there's more than 30 people using XSLT2. Within of Saxon supporting XSLT2. There were, what was it, Mike? 30,000 downloads? Not within the first 30 seconds, but...
Your numbers are sort of tautological.
That's right. Yeah, but there were a lot of downloads. I remember when we had the call with the director to say, should we move XSLT2 forward as a recommendation? You know, and we heard from Mike Kay how many downloads of Saxon there had been, and it was certainly more than 30. It was in the thousands. May have been in the tens of thousands. One of the things I hear a lot of people saying they want is a web framework. They want to write web apps with XSLT2, maybe XProc, maybe XQuery, orchestrating on the back end. And when they come to do it, you know, they open their XQuery book or their the XSLT book. You all know which one I mean. And they look at the index for, you know, decoding CGI parameters. How do I get CGI parameters? Why isn't it there? Well, it's because we didn't put it in. You can't get it. You know, how do I find the height and width of an image? Well, every web app needs that. That's really unusual to have. I should say 99% of them use that because someone will come up to me with a text only. Right, so there's just a few small pieces that are outside. And if you look at, okay, there's an unbounded number of pieces that are on the outside. At what point do you start? Well, if you look at what the implementations of existing frameworks have done, you say, why can't I switch implementations? Right? Why can't I switch from setnet to exist, or exist to setnet, or GizX Open, or Saxon, or why do I have to change all this stuff where I have Java code in here, or C functions in here, when in fact all this stuff. Hands up if you're an EXSLT person, whether you're using it or who's used EXSLT or EXPath or EXQuery or ESVG or ERDF, EASCII, quite a few. All right, quite a few. I'd love to see that kind of work come more closely, working more closely with W3C. We should list those specs on our pages, give pointers to them. The work has been done carefully, it's packaged well, it's described well. Although, typically what happens is you take something into a spec, into a working group, you actually suddenly have a wider community looking at it, and they'll make changes. But let's try and have a way where people can give input, right? And some of this stuff can happen collectively. Maybe we've got a conference here. It's been suggested we need to have a conference that is slightly more business focused and user focused. It's been suggested we need to have a conference that's more academic. It's been suggested we need to have a conference that's on one of those nearby planets, Planet RDF or Planet HTML5 or something. I don't know the answer. That probably goes under education and outreach. I've put quite a few other things up here. Right? Is this big enough to read from the back? Yeah, okay. Okay, I kind of keep track of ideas. People come to me and say, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? So I try and say, well, where is the momentum? The way new work happens at W3C is members come and say they want work. Or people from outside contact us and say, we'd like to do this work at W3C, we'll join if necessary, if you do this work. Or sometimes we just think of it and say, does anyone want to do this? Right, so we're member driven. If we think of something, like if the team thinks of something and says, we as a staff at W3C think of something, and we say we'd like to do this, we still need our members to say yes, do it, or no, don't waste your time on it. So we're member driven. I've written a few ideas here, because I didn't know how interactive this would be to pipes, you get gurgling noises. So, so Zergle is for the idea of going a bit further with XProg and orchestrating more directly the use of XSLT and XQuery. Why? Because people come, why am I thinking of this? Because people come to me and say, we're using XQuery on the back end to fetch lots of data, and we turn it into XML, and then we use XSLT to turn it into web pages, let's say. Or, you know, maybe we have 3 different XSLT transforms. Or in the case of someone from eBay once told me they had 4 million lines of XSLT. I was a bit frightened by that. I was. A million lines of XSLT is too frightening for me, actually. All right, but, so the idea of taking the orchestration thing a bit further. There's experiments obviously ongoing with XQuery scripting to do this too. But you can't, currently you can't even call XSLT from XQuery scripting, although that may have changed soon. When we did Xlink, we gained some things and we lost some things. That's true with all the specs. Sharon mentioned this morning that some of the things we've lost were good, some were bad. At least once a month someone comes up to me and they've reinvented markup minimization. I can tell them that when I worked for a company that produced SGML products, we could put a dollar figure on the cost to support of minimization. And it's not just the cost of code, it's the cost of all those people on the telephone saying, my parser says extra text at end of document. I can hear the bitter laughs from people who use SGML parsers that merrily closed all the elements and then says, all right, I've finished. Now what's this element I don't recognize? Well, you've got extra stuff at the end of the document on line 12 out of 2 million. How do I fix it, they say? Well, you've got to open and close your elements correctly. Well, I've got 23 empty close tags here with no names in them, and I don't know what's wrong. All right, but we lost some bad things. That is to say, it's bad that we lost some things that were good. We lost high time. Does anyone here remember high time? Sounds like a song by Vera Lynn. Or by Pink Floyd, maybe. So, architectural forms were this idea that you put a processing instruction and you say, in this document, this element does this. It's a link, for example. In this document, the img element has a source attribute, which is a link to an image. It has a link desk attribute, which is a link to a description. We lost that ability. Now, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. We lost it. I think it's probably bad because it's a reason why some people can't use Xlink, as they see it. Who here uses W3C XML schema? Who here uses relaxing? Who here likes relaxing? Yerka and some other people. Okay.
Ask the other question.
Who here likes XML schema? More people than Yerka. Okay. I'm not going to answer.
We'll just close my friends right now.
Okay. So the question I have is, what if we set up a group, and this, in W3C terms, this is the kind of thing we call an incubator group. A group to investigate a problem and see if we should do work. What if we started work to say, what kind of, could you do one spec that took, don't laugh, took good bits out of XML schema. No, they took they took the empty set and added to it, for example, the type hierarchy, the idea of user-defined types. So not just the base types, but user-defined types. Okay, thanks. And put that into relaxing. Maybe substitution groups, I don't know. Maybe not. and the data model are defined in terms of things of the type system that's in schema to a certain extent. There's actually a bit of a mismatch, but to a certain extent. But the relaxing type system isn't actually rich enough to be like
different. It's not rich enough. It's different. It's a pattern grammar. It's not a type hierarchy.
That's exactly true. Ken is saying it's a pattern grammar, not a type hierarchy. That's exactly true, yeah. What happens if you make a mashup? Do you get a mess? Do you get a dog's breakfast, or do you get something more useful, or both?
All I'm saying is it's different rather than what you were saying is that it's a shortcoming.
Yeah, so Ken is pointing out it's a different way of looking at things. It's a pattern matching and not a type hierarchy. That's true.
Can I ask you, why would we want to harmonize these two things?
Yeah, because for users, right now you've got two different schema languages, and the question is, and I don't know what the answer is.
Is that a problem for
Well, I
them?
don't know.
Don't they make choices?
Well, they do make choices, but then they're often forced to make choices because one tool will support one. People often come to me and say, why using XML schema? This tool supports one, this tool supports relaxing, I have to use both. It's a pain.
Talk to the vendors then, not to the
That's the
W3C.
vendor's problem.
It's the vendor's problem to some extent, but then once you've got data in two formats, you've got an integrity question.
Why do W3C schema processors ignore DTD entity declarations at the top that I want to use inside of my application?
I don't believe they should.
I agree that they should, but vendors will ignore them.
Okay, they're back, Michael. I think you're raising your hand to speak.
XML operates globally.
And I'm talking about the vendors not supporting entity declarations at the top of the XML document that is an XSP schema. And
They're not supporting global XML.
exactly. But I think it's you asked what are the users complaining to W3C about their vendor's tool not working for them is how I was interpreting what you were just saying there. And the vendors themselves, W3C supporting vendors, aren't supporting all of XML. They aren't supporting multi-formatness in XSD documents, etc., etc.
I agree with you, that sounds like a problem. I'd like to talk with you afterwards to see what we can do about it. About entity support, and, should we contact vendors, should we... I mean, those are specific questions.
But isn't there a what's the word I'm looking for? Not collusion, but you have a W3C member promoting a W3C spec without supporting the W3C spec. Half the world buys that product and ends up not being able to use stuff I'm working with UBL because I'm trying to use XML the way I want to work with it. And I get blamed for not using XML properly because they look at a W3C member's vendor tool that doesn't work.
Okay, I think there's two sides to that.
That's not my choice.
No, there's two sides to that, actually. One of them is, yes, it's really sucky that people don't implement things well. Has anyone here ever used a thing called a web browser? Has anyone here ever used a web browser that supports XML and all of XML, including entities, or that supports all of CSS? Let's say 2.1, CSS 2.1. You haven't, because there isn't one. Getting people to support things, for them they see it as a cost-benefit trade-off usually. The other side of it, though, which is a really important thing that you've raised, is about education. It's about people come and say, I learned my XML schema by looking at the output of this tool.
But doesn't the W3C need a stick? You've got lots of carrots, but don't you need sticks?
We do need sticks, and we don't have sticks. You're right. We don't have good sticks, it's a problem.
Okay.
I wish we did, but we don't.
I wish you did too.
Right. No, and yes, ISO sometimes has a stick for some specs in the sense that governments may legislate things.
No, but still,
But
you
I say
only
doesn't
see real conformance.
Right.
But, that will add much more time and bureaucracy, which certainly is in this day and age. But the real stick has to be the customer.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
that's not happening.
Well, file advice with the vendor. Okay, I'll go through these quickly, and then because I see changes happening in the data binding and API area. New XML APIs are happening in Python, for example, right now, and in C. Was interested to hear the topic maps talk. One of the things that concerns me about IDF, and we've got an incubator group looking at it, is provenance and privacy. Provenance is tracking where did this information come from. So you take all this stuff and you shove it into your RDF database or your topic map, but it might be that you need to remember where each supposed fact came from because you don't trust some people. Okay, I have 2 sentences, I think, so. I don't have anything to say about HTML5 and the people who do not understand XML. I should say something about XML, and there are HTML5 people who do understand XML, by the way. They're a minority though. The long-term people ask me about XML2, and I just say think about your television set. Right? Think about your shoes that control your iPod. Think about your aircraft and XML built into the air traffic control system or navigation. Okay. My email address is there. I'll put it higher up here. So that you can all send me spam like 2 million people in Nigeria.
What can you say about academia coming to the W3C asking about teaching these technologies?
About academia coming, what can I say about academia coming to the W3C and
About regarding teaching these technologies.
teaching to who?
To their students, offering undergraduate programs in XML and related technologies. Does academia come to W3C asking about this?
Sometimes, and in fact, I mean, in some other areas, W3C has done training. We've done training in the mobile web last year, for example, which apparently went quite well. My own feeling is it was a disaster. The reason for these 2 simultaneous feelings is that I think yesterday we got our 10,000th follower on Twitter at W3C. Successful outreach is reaching 10,000 people. 80 people or 200 people is not successful outreach when you're dealing with the scale of W3C. Unless we did, if it was 80 people, each of whom were going to go away and run courses at schools and universities, then that would be a success in my mind. So I would be interested in having W3C run courses on how to run courses. Right? But if we actually start running courses, I think all we do is compete with people like Ken Holman. And if we start, I mean, when people come up to me privately, I'll quite happily recommend 3 or 4 people who do training, at least one of whom is in this room. Okay?
Is the OER?
I'm sorry?
I thought you might want to mention the OER, the Open Web Application Alliance XG.
I could have.
Repeat question. Just for
Robin wants me to mention the OER thing, the Open Web Education Alliance incubator group, but I don't actually know what they're doing, so I've mentioned them.
we have time for last question. Mark?
Just on the XML schema relaxing, isn't one of the dangers that you have 2 standards that appear to work for some people? You want to get one standard that works for everyone, and you actually end up with 3 standards, the 2 old ones that some people don't want to leave, plus the new one in the middle, which isn't that a problem with trying to bring things together?
Okay, so the question is, if we worked on harmonisation with relaxing at a technical level, trying to produce a combined spec, isn't there a danger that we'd end up with 3 specs? Original schema, original relaxing, and the new one. And there was, every now and again, it's actually once about every 6 months, I meet someone who's still using SGML because of some feature that they say they can't live without. Eventually they will stop living without it, one way or another. But that's why I said we would have if we did that work, the way to start would be with an incubate a group not to do the technical work, but to say what would be the impact of the technical work? Would it be worth doing? And can we get sufficient buy-in? And I don't know the answers to that. Please come up to me in the break or at lunch and
Thank you very much.